Welcome once again, everybody. This is Mr. Mitchell, and we are going to be looking today at one-step equations, specifically using the additive inverse to solve one-step equations. So as a quick review, let's remind ourselves what the additive inverse actually is. When we deal with additive inverse, what we need to remember is that the word inverse, typically we use that word to mean opposite, and additive meaning what do we add that's the opposite. Okay, so let's look at this. Let's say that you had the number 5, and I said, what is the additive inverse of 5? Well, what you need to think about is, what number would you add that's the opposite of 5? And that's all additive inverse really is. So if I have 5 and I want to add the opposite of that, I'm going to add the opposite of 5. And the opposite of 5, if you remember, is negative 5. Okay? Now when we add 5 and negative 5, think of it in this way. Let's say you had $5 and you spent $5, which is what the negative 5 would be. You're getting rid of those $5 somehow. If you had 5 and spent 5, what would you have at the end? And of course you would have nothing. So that's the idea of the additive inverse, is it's a way to eliminate or cancel a constant number. Okay, 5 is a constant. If we add negative 5, then that eliminates that 5. So with a one-step equation, what we're looking at is we're trying to eliminate a constant so that we can find out what value a variable has. So for example, if I gave you the problem y plus 6 equals, and let's just pick some random number, let's say 13. Okay? So y plus 6 equals 13. Well, when we use the additive inverse, what we're trying to do is we're trying to isolate the variable. And what that means is we are trying to get y, okay, our variable y, we're trying to isolate it or get it by itself, which basically means we need to get rid of this plus 6. That plus 6 is causing us all kinds of problems. Now, I'm sure most of you have probably figured this out in your head just by realizing that if you add something to 6 and it equals 13, you can figure out what that is. And again, that's very common and that's fine, but what you need to understand is that the process that we're teaching you with this step is something that you're going to use when we get to 4-step equations or 5-step equations or 6-step equations. So the idea behind this is what's important, not necessarily that you understand how to solve it and get a right answer. It's the idea of when I use the additive inverse, it helps lead me to a point where I can solve a problem. So that's what we want you to figure out. So with this problem, what we need to do is we're going to use the additive inverse, which means we're going to add the same value to both sides of the equation that will eliminate that 6. Okay? So another way of thinking of it is, if you have 6 of something, what do you need to do to get rid of it? How do you get rid of 6 of something? And of course the answer is to add the opposite of it. So if I have a positive 6, I'm going to add the opposite of that, which means I'm going to add negative 6 to both sides of my equation. Now the reason that we add to both sides of the equation, and you can think of this in terms of like weightlifting. If you've ever done a bench press, you'll know that it's very important to have the same weight on both sides of that bar. If you have on one side of the bar 50 pounds and you only have 10 pounds on the other side, then either A, you're going to get a really weird looking body type because one arm is going to be huge and the other one's going to be tiny, or you're not even going to be able to do that and it's just going to all fall off to the side. Okay? So anytime that you do something to an equation, think of the equal sign as that bar that you're using during a bench press. You have to do the same thing to both sides. They're equal right now. So if you add negative 6 to one side, you have to add negative 6 to the other side. Okay? And yes, it would be a hilarious prank if you were to add 10 pounds to one side when your brother's doing a bench press, and yes, that would be awesome. And it would be hilarious. But the idea being, with an equation, you need to make sure that you're doing the same thing to both sides. Okay? So here we go. We're going to add negative 6 to both sides of the equation. And something that I like to do, and you don't have to do this, but I like to do it, is I like to think of this as just a math problem. Okay? And that's all it is. And when you add things, when you were in elementary school, your teacher told you, put one on top of the other and add the ones column together and the tens column and so on and so forth. And we can do that same idea here. When we add these together, 6 and negative 6, which is what we have right here, those cancel each other out. That becomes a zero pair. Remember the idea of zero pairs, where you have a positive and a negative that cancel each other out. That's a zero pair. So 6 and negative 6 is really 0. So we can, if we want to, rewrite that as just 0. Okay, so we would be left with y plus 0 equals, and then on our other side we have 13 and negative 6, and this is where you can use either the plus and minus signs to find zero pairs, or you can use a number line, or you can use your columns, or you can just think about the fact that if you have $13 and you take away 6 of those dollars because you're adding negative 6, or if you have $13 and you owe your sister $6 and you pay her off, how much money do you have left? Okay, so 13 and negative 6 ends up being a positive 7. Okay, so now we have y plus 0 equals 7, but do we really need to write plus 0? Does that even make any difference at all? And of course it does not. You can add 0 to anything and it doesn't change anything. So that just becomes y equals 7. Okay, so let's try another one. And this time we're going to add something a little bit differently. Let's say that I gave you y and plus, let's say, negative 4 equals 2. Okay, now this one might be a little bit more challenging for those of you that like to do these problems in your head, and this is why knowing the idea behind additive inverse is so important. So let's look at what we have. First off, we should notice that this negative 4 is what's causing our problems, because remember, we're trying to isolate the variable, or get the variable by itself. So we need to get rid of that negative 4. So what is the opposite of negative 4? And the answer, of course, is positive 4. So to get rid of or eliminate the negative 4, we're going to add 4 to both sides of the equation. And the reason that we do this, again, is to eliminate the constant that's on the same side of the equation as the y, or our variable. So when I add these together, I'm going to get negative 4 plus 4, which is 0, which of course we don't need to write because we don't have to add 0 to anything. So we're really left with y. These more or less we can just say cancel each other out. And then over here on the right we have 2 plus 4, which is 6. And this is where a lot of people that try to do these problems in their head get confused, because they say, wait, negative 4, how is 6 plus negative 4 2? Okay, so this is where the idea of using additive inverse is important. It clarifies that what you're really needing to do is add 4 to both sides to get your answer, rather than just trying to figure it out in your head. Okay? So now let's try one more thing. I want to throw one more little curveball at you here and see if you guys can hit it. One last problem. Let's say I gave you this. 13 equals y minus 4. Okay? A lot of times students will look at this problem and they'll say, oh, that's easy. I just need to add negative 13 to both sides. And the problem with that is that's not helping us. Because remember, our goal is to isolate the variable. We need to have y by itself. So what you need to do with this problem is you have to ask yourself, what number is on the same side of the equation as the y? What is it that's keeping me from knowing the answer? And in this case, our variable is on the right side of the equation. And the number negative 4, the constant negative 4, that's the number that I have a problem with. So if you have negative 4, what is the opposite of negative 4? And hopefully you would say, just like we did in our last problem, that the answer would be positive 4. So in this case, you're going to add 4 to both sides of the equation. And again, for some reason, I've never understood why students like to do this. But when you add negative 4, please don't add 4 to y. That doesn't make any sense. Okay? Add 4 to the negative 4 and then add 4 to 13. You can only add things that are the same. So if you have two numbers, they can be added together. You can't add y plus 4 to get something. Okay? So we're going to add 4 to both sides. On this side of the equation, the right side of the equation, remember that these 4's essentially cancel each other out, so we're left with y. And on the left side of the equation, we now have 13 plus 4, which is 17. So there we have 3 different examples of solving a one-step equation using additive inverse. All of them different situations, all of them with either a positive or a negative number. So hopefully this will give you guys a good starting point so that as we go into the more difficult subjects, the more difficult topics, this will be the ground floor. Please make sure that you understand this. Don't try to do these things in your head. It's not going to help. Don't use the guess and check method. Don't try to solve it by just, plugging in random numbers and seeing if it works. It's not a hard thing to do. Just take your time, step by step, follow through, think about what you're doing, and I guarantee you if you do that, you'll get it right every single time. That should do it. Talk to you guys later. Have a great night.